Hi there, you're at Real Turkey Channel, and I'm your imprisoned host, Atilla Yeşilada. You see my working space where I have self-quarantined myself because I am the virus. I am more dangerous than COVID-19. In this particular broadcast, I want to talk about the state of corona affairs in Turkey, i.e. how fast it's spreading, and how the economy is being affected by the scourge, and what the government is doing about that. Turkey is a latecomer to the coronavirus pandemic in the sense that the first case was diagnosed about 8 days ago. Unfortunately, a mistake was made to think that the virus came from abroad via someone who traveled to China or to Europe, probably. This, in my view, wasn't the case. I think the virus came through the Iran and Iraqi borders or Syrian border through human trafficking. That's illegal border crossing and illegal refugees, and is widely spread in the population. In fact, the caseload jumped from 1 to 5 to 18 to 50 to 100, which is, as anyone who has studied math would know, is an exponential function. And cases are likely to increase double or quadruple each day as Turkey starts testing very large numbers of suspect groups. Throughout the world, the experiences, the more you test, the more you find. A mistake India is making is not testing enough people. South Korea, Japan, China tested everyone they can get their hands on. And in all of these three countries, the epidemics are about to end. I hope they don't come back to those countries. How bad can it get? Well, I'm not a medical expert, except that I know which pharmaceuticals I should take to ease my pain. But open statements by Turkish Physicians Association members, as well as doctors who serve on the High Science Council, suggest that the caseload could increase to at least 20,000 by June, and in worst case scenarios, 200,000. And Turkey should plan accordingly in terms of, health personnel, emergency care units, medicines, etc., etc. The second thing that the Turkish government believes is that it is partly accepted by the medical community, but there is no consensus on it, is the view that this particular coronavirus, like SARS and MERS, will become dormant once the weather gets warm and humidity increases. Indeed, there is some research on that, which is not peer-reviewed, but we have to be cautious because this doesn't have to be the case. It is too risky to rely on the weather to fight the epidemic. Turkey should make longer-term plans. Possible scenarios are the virus moving to the southern hemisphere for their winter and then coming back in the autumn and winter season to the northern hemisphere to kill and hurt people again. United States, for instance, if I understand it correctly, has just finished an 18-month. So if, the weather cures the virus, well, Turkey is lucky and it's great. End of the story. But if it doesn't, the economy stands to suffer massive damage. Obviously, we have received a windfall from the sudden drop in oil prices, but unfortunately, that bonus is going to be mitigated by the loss of the tourism season. Tourism last year generated $26 billion of net hard currency revenue. Reading insiders from the industry, hoteliers, etc., suggest that the revenue might decline by 40% or so this year. It's not because Turkey will have a pandemic epidemic, I'm sorry, it's because the people don't want to travel. And in fact, it is forbidden to travel in most of those countries. So tourism is going to suffer a lot. Exports are going to suffer somewhat. Iran and Iraq are lost markets as far as I'm concerned. And EU is going to remain shut for the time being. Obviously, in corollary to exports, we're also going to lose, freight and logistics, land transportation. Turkey, like United States, is a domestic demand-driven economy. The services sector makes up 60% of the GDP. What is the services sector? Well, obviously there are banks and civil aviation, but also thousands, maybe millions of small shops, mom and pop owned or individual owned, food or textiles or hawk vegetables, etc., bars, cafes, restaurants, etc., etc. In Turkey, franchising is relatively new, and most of these enterprises are qualified as small businesses. They have very weak capital structures, and now because of the safe distancing rules and shutdowns, they are suffering a massive cash flow loss. They will start laying off employees soon. Even before this terrible disease started, Turkey's non-farm unemployment rate was something like 5% as of December. If you add on top of that the potential employment losses, we could suffer a massive disaster. It's sort of like a vicious cycle. The small service companies lays off employees. They don't collect unemployment insurance. They don't consume. The demand for all goods and services go down. Then industries which are not necessarily affected by COVID-19 start laying off workers, and we go back to square zero and start over, and it gets worse. So when Ankara unveils these packages, the focus ought to be to prevent unemployment losses. And secondly, as our viewers in the Western countries would know, to avoid a credit crunch, that is a freeze of the money and credit markets. I think the central bank has done the right thing, just like Fed and European Central Bank. It announced several liquidity provision mechanisms and measures, and essentially will, pump as any bank requires through swap facilities or repo facilities. These are good measures. I fully support them. I don't support the 100 basis points rate cut because Turkish rates were already too low. In fact, they were negative in inflation-adjusted terms. This means that Turks have no incentive to hold their own currency and are keeping their savings in dollars or euros. That makes monetary policy difficult to execute, as well as creating a lira shortage with which banks ought to lend to small businesses and to consumers. So I think the rate cuts were wrong. Our president, Mr. Erdogan, announced a comprehensive economic measures package, which I support, but it's not enough. It's not enough because there is not enough cash in the package. Of the 22 or so articles or items that were listed in the plan, those that actually involve cash transfers to households are 3 or 4. The biannual bonuses to 12.5 million pensioners will be brought forward to April. Good, check mark. The minimum retirement salary or wage payment would be increased to 1,500 liras. Good, congratulations, check mark. The conditions to benefit from unemployment insurance would be eased. Good, check mark. And there would be a 2 billion lira or $300 million fund to help poor families in distress. Good, but inadequate. Remember, most of the people are employed in the service industries, and they're very likely to suffer unemployment soon. We should completely get rid of any prior conditions to qualify for unemployment insurance, and we should pay everyone off who is unemployed for whatever reason to make sure that the consumption stream is not interrupted. Secondly, 33% of the Turkish workforce are not members of the Social Security Administration. You know, they're not necessarily illegal workers, but they can't afford to make the payroll tax, or their companies can't. And currently, they have no unemployment benefits. They cannot utilize that facility. A mechanism must be found to pay these people, because if they don't consume, their families will suffer and the Turkish economy will suffer. Again, I don't want to be too negative or critical of the government, because these are really harsh times and they're doing their best, in my view. I think more packages will be announced. Brings us to the final question: how are we going to finance this, and what would be the side effects of this financing? Turkey officially generated 2.5% of GDP in terms of budget deficits last year. This year, I expect 4.5%, even before this epidemic. And now we're delaying taxes, reducing value-added tax in affected industries, which means tax collection would go down and expenditures will have to go up. The budget deficit will explode. And how do you finance the budget deficit? Well, first, you cut all unnecessary spending, and that should be done. Projects like Canal Istanbul ought to be completely forgotten, and we should focus all of our budgetary resources to feeding the unemployed. Secondly, external borrowing, which is very difficult because entire emerging markets universe is embroiled in a havoc now. People don't want to buy anything from emerging markets, so foreign borrowing is going to be very difficult. Domestic borrowing is a possibility, but we have to remember that Turkey is a savings deficient country. In other words, our banks are not big or liquid enough to finance additional budget deficits and to provide the credit needs of the private sector. So if the entire additional budget deficit is borrowed through the bond market, government bond market, interest rates or bond yields would increase substantially, which would cramp private and consumption. I think a combination of more bond issuance plus central bank outright money printing and, you know, the government borrowing from central bank are okay. These are difficult times and we need to think outside the box. However, if the necessary expenditures are going to be financed by money printing, we should look at the experience of Fed and the QEs. What Fed did to end the 2008, 2009 great financial crises was absolutely necessary. It saved not only the United States and the world economy, but most of the money they printed through asset purchase programs went to financial markets. It didn't go to the real market. This is why people keep saying, well, you know, America bailed out the Wall Street, but not the Main Street. We don't want to make the same mistake in Turkey. We want to make sure that the money government borrows from the central bank is spent appropriately, goes to cash injections of unemployed people or to keep small businesses solvent. If we lose track of who is receiving these relief packages or fund transfers, we would have speculation in the stock market and money would go further to hard currency purchases, which would cause depreciation of the lira and, of course, a balance of payments problem down the line. At a time like this, there are no win-win scenarios. Everything, every measure you announce, every step you take has a risk with it and a side effect with it. And this is where Turkey is. To be perfectly honest with you, even the best measures could not prevent a recession. the best that Ankara can do is to delay the recession, hope the weather will solve the problem, to make the recession shallow, and to make sure it doesn't turn into a depression or financial crisis. This is the criteria by which Ankara or any government ought to be measured, and the jury is out. But as the caseload proliferates, as I'm afraid of, I shall update you. Thanks for watching this broadcast, and if you like my workspace, you can buy it since there are no buyers right now. If you like this, well, there's nothing to like in it. It's all sad news. But if you find it informative, please subscribe or share it with your friends and businesses who do business in Turkey or who for some reason are interested in Turkish affairs. You just watched another video by Real Turkey channel and your presenter Atilla Yeşilada, who stay safe and stay away from other people. Bye bye now.